Let's configure the LBAVS tool. It's worth noting that in a future release, this step will no longer be required, so make sure you check the updated Lightbits documentation. In order to configure the LBAVS tool, I'll need information about my AVS SDDC as well as my Lightbits cluster. I'll also need to SSH into one of the Lightbits cluster nodes. So I'm going to select the VMSS for Lightbits cluster, click Instances, and then select Instance 0 from the VMSS instance information. I copy the private IP address, and then I'm going to use PuTTY from with my jump host to connect to this VM. If you're using PuTTY, you'll have a PEM file instead of a .ppk, which is what you'll need in order to SSH into this VM. You'll be able to see me create the ppk from the .pem file here, using the key that I downloaded when I deployed my Lightbits cluster. Now that I have this key, I can go into my PuTTY configuration to SSH and auth, and then in credentials I can choose the SSH key based on the ppk that I just created. I go back to my session and I'm actually just going to save this session as instance 0 so I can SSH back to that instance easier. I'm going to use my username at the IP address so that it logs in straight away as my user using the key. And now I have an SSH session into one of my Lightbits instances. Inside the SSH session, I'm going to become sudo, and then I'm going to move the example lbavs.yaml file to a yaml.back file. Now I'm going to create a new lbavs.yaml file at etc lbavs lbavs.yaml. In this file, I'm going to paste the content from the documentation example page. It should look exactly like this. Inside this file, I'm going to replace anything with a $ and curly braces. So I'm going to grab the subscription ID of my SCDC by navigating to my SCDC and then copying the subscription ID and pasting it into the YAML file. I'm then going to add the name of my SCDC. As you can see, mine is Felix Demo AVS. Paste it into that section. I'm going to add the resource group that the SCD is deployed in. So in the overview section, you can see the resource group there. I'm going to copy it and paste it where it says group. And we're using a managed identity so we can leave the rest of the AVSS section alone. We can move on to the Lightbits section. The endpoint is actually going to be a load balancer front-end IP. So I go to my managed resource group that my managed application uses. I go to the LB private resource front-end IP configuration. And here is the front-end IP address that will load balance any of my REST API calls to the Lightbits cluster. The last thing I need to enter is the Lightbits JOT, which gives me authentication to run API calls against the Lightbits cluster. I go to the key vault that's part of the managed application. I go to secrets and then system JOT. And I'm just going to copy the secret value and I'm going to paste it into this section. To make it easier to run LB CLI commands, we do add an export to the front. So make sure that you delete the export lightOS JOT equals and just leave the contents of the JOT. Press escape, write quit or WQ. We're now going to test the configuration of LBAVS by typing in LBAVS space data store space list. Then we're going to give a -v, and we're going to take the cluster name within the SCDC, which in this case is cluster-1 with a capital C. Yours will likely be the same if you're using a default SCDC. When I press enter and run this LBAVS data store list command, if you navigate to the SCDC itself and then go to run command, Once the run command page has loaded, if you go to run execution status, you'll be able to see that there's a get VMFS data store execution that is running. And once this run command is complete, within the SSH session, you'll get an output which should say something along the lines of no data stores. If we get this output, we know that the configuration is correct. If we don't get any output, we know we need to configure or change one of the parameters in the YAML file.